What if I told you there once lived a woman who insisted she was not born of this earth? Her name was Adelaide Thompson, and in the winter of 1873, she was locked away inside a quiet English asylum because she claimed her soul came from another world. Doctors called her delusional, priests called her cursed, and the newspapers refused to print her name. Yet, strange events surrounding her confinement. Unexplained lights, foreign words whispered in her sleep, clocks stopping when she entered a room, forced even the skeptics to question what they believed about sanity, life, and the thin fabric separating our world from whatever lies beyond it. Tonight, we open Adelaide's forgotten case file, pieced together from asylum journals, faded police reports, and a diary no historian can fully explain. What they recorded was not madness alone, but something else, something cosmic, ancient, and disturbingly intelligent speaking through a young woman's fragile body. Stay with me as we descend into her story, a blend of science, superstition, and the supernatural. And before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Historic Book for more dark history and disturbing mysteries where reality itself begins to unravel. The year was 1873, and England was drowning in fog, both literal and moral. The Industrial Revolution had transformed cities into smoking machines of progress, yet superstition still clung to the countryside like frost. In the small Derbyshire village of Stonemere, Adelaide Thompson lived with her mother, a widow who took in sewing work for the nearby manor. Adelaide was quiet, observant, often seen writing symbols into her notebooks that no one could read. Villagers whispered that she spoke to the sky, her words soft and foreign. One afternoon, as she hung linens in the pale sunlight, she suddenly collapsed. When she awoke, she no longer answered to her name. Instead, she whispered a single phrase over and over in a language unknown to any ear that heard it. Her mother, terrified, brought her to the local vicar, believing her daughter to be possessed. But the vicar's prayers seemed only to disturb Adelaide further. She began to describe memories of a place with no stars, a world where sound moved differently, and where people had no shadows. Her voice changed, lower, older, almost echoing itself. Those who saw her in the days that followed swore that her eyes no longer reflected light the same way. The local physician, Dr. Harland, recorded in his journal that when he examined her, her pulse does not align with the clock. It skips time. Adelaide's life was about to turn into one of the strangest and most haunting mysteries in Victorian medical history. By late December, Adelaide's condition had become the center of gossip throughout Stonemere. People gathered outside her home, hoping for a glimpse of the girl who came from elsewhere. Some said she no longer ate or drank for days, yet her body showed no sign of weakening. Dr. Harland, driven by curiosity and fear of professional ridicule, decided to document her case for the Royal Society of Medicine. His notes read like something torn between science and nightmare. Subject remains conscious during apparent paralysis. Skin temperature below normal. Eyes dilated even in darkness. Patient speaks in unknown phonemes that repeat every 13 seconds, resembling rhythm rather than speech. Adelaide's mother, desperate and ashamed, begged him not to publish. But Harlan believed he was standing on the edge of discovery or damnation. One night, while observing Adelaide under candlelight, the doctor noticed something impossible. As the flame flickered, the shadows of every object in the room moved, except hers. He wrote, trembling, "The girl casts no shadow when observed alone." From that evening forward, Adelaide was no longer treated as a patient, but as a phenomenon. The local church demanded an exorcism, while the doctor sought permission to bring her to London for study. And through all of it, Adelaide sat silently by the window, whispering to someone, or something, that no one else could see. Villagers began locking their doors after dusk, terrified that whatever spoke through Adelaide might be listening for new voices to answer. By January 1874, the authorities intervened. Adelaide Thompson, now labeled dangerously unstable, was transported under guard to the Whitby Asylum for Women, a gray fortress perched above the North Sea cliffs. The journey itself became the stuff of whispered legend. As the carriage passed through mist-covered fields, the horses grew restless, snorting, refusing to move near the crossroads where a lightning rod had split a tree. The coachman swore that when he looked through the small rear window, he saw Adelaide's reflection, though she was facing forward. When they finally reached the asylum gates, thunder cracked without a storm. Inside, the attendants noted her calm demeanor, her eyes scanning the ceilings as though tracing invisible constellations no one else could see. Within the asylum, Dr. Harlan's reports grew increasingly erratic. He described how Adelaide could predict the exact time of a patient's death minutes before it occurred. When questioned, she would simply reply, "They have called her name." She began to draw strange circular diagrams on her cell walls, spirals within spirals, that seemed to hum faintly when the wind howled through the halls. Even the matrons refused to enter her room at night, claiming the temperature dropped so drastically that breath crystallized in the air. By the second week, she stopped speaking entirely. Yet the ward echoed with murmurs in that same unearthly language, recorded by multiple witnesses on nights when Adelaide slept. Something was inhabiting the quiet spaces of the asylum, something ancient, watching. It began with a scream that tore through the asylum like the shriek of iron. The night nurse, Margaret Vale, claimed she had entered Adelaide's room after hearing whispering near the corridor. What she found inside was so horrifying that she refused to ever return. Adelaide stood in the center of the room, her feet hovering several inches above the cold stone floor. The walls glowed faintly with the same spiral symbols she had drawn days before, pulsing like veins beneath the plaster. Margaret fled, but others came running, and when they entered moments later, the glow had vanished. Adelaide sat silently on her cot, her hands folded, her lips curved in a faint, almost childlike smile. Dr. Harlan dismissed it as hysteria and mass delusion, until he saw the nurse's hands trembling for hours after, her pulse racing as though she'd survived an electric storm. In the days that followed, instruments began to fail. Clocks in the ward slowed and stopped altogether when Adelaide was nearby. Metal utensils rusted overnight. Even ink darkened to an oily black, as if absorbing something unseen. The attendants spoke in hushed tones of the hum, a low, continuous vibration in the walls, strongest near Adelaide's cell. Harlan, now terrified, conducted nightly experiments. He left a compass beside her bed, and each morning found it spinning endlessly, pointing nowhere. He began to question whether this was madness at all, or a kind of communication. In his journal, his handwriting wavered as he wrote, "I no longer believe she is ill. I believe she is elsewhere." Dr. Harlan's fascination grew into a quiet madness. He spent sleepless nights outside Adelaide's cell, sketching her symbols, comparing them to ancient alchemical texts and pagan carvings. He convinced himself she was a vessel, a bridge between two dimensions, not a delusional child, but a messenger. The asylum staff began to fear him more than her. His eyes darkened, his handwriting fractured, his pulse quickened whenever she spoke. He no longer recorded temperatures or heartbeats. He wrote of resonance and harmonic intrusion. In his laboratory notebook, one phrase appeared again and again. "She remembers what came before light." The idea infected him. Within weeks, he dismissed his assistants and spent entire nights in her room, whispering questions no one else dared to ask. The asylum's matron filed a report to the Ministry of Health, requesting Harlan's removal. But by then, strange disturbances plagued the entire building. Windows shattered without wind. Candles burned with black smoke. Several patients began humming Adelaide's strange melody in their sleep, their voices merging in perfect, haunting unison. One woman, a mute for years, suddenly spoke in Adelaide's other tongue. The sound drove an attendant to tears before he collapsed, muttering that he'd seen a second moon through her eyes. Fear became a living thing in Whitby Asylum, crawling along the corridors, feeding on disbelief. Harlan refused to leave. "To understand her," he wrote, "is to understand what we were before we became human." On the night of February 3, 1874, the asylum slept uneasily under a heavy fog that rolled in from the sea. In the records, That date appears underlined 3 times, marked as the night of disturbance. Dr. Harland, having locked himself in Adelaide's chamber, prepared what he called his experiment of translation. He had constructed a crude electrical device using copper wire, magnets, and saline jars, believing he could measure or perhaps trigger the frequency Adelaide's body emitted. The attending nurse reported hearing a low hum, followed by a blinding flash that flickered beneath the door. When the locks were broken at dawn, Harland was found slumped beside his apparatus, his hair turned completely white. Adelaide, however, was standing by the window, calm and untouched, whispering softly into the morning light. The doctor survived, but was never the same. He spoke in riddles, scribbled circles that matched Adelaide's spirals, and could no longer bear the sound of ticking clocks. He was transferred to a separate ward as a patient himself, leaving behind over 200 pages of incoherent notes, half scientific equations, half prayers to something beyond the lattice of stars. The asylum board forbade further experiments, but the damage had been done. Adelaide no longer responded to her name at all. She wrote symbols across the walls in what looked like constellations, and when connected by chalk, they formed a pattern no one recognized. Until decades later, when astronomers discovered a matching cluster of stars, invisible from Earth until the invention of modern telescopes. In March of 1874, a delegation from London arrived, 2 physicians, a linguist, and a priest, sent by the Crown to verify the growing rumors of cosmic possession in Whitby Asylum. They expected madness, not miracles. Upon entering Adelaide's cell, the air itself seemed to change. One of the men described a sensation as if standing underwater. Adelaide sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes fixed on a point above their heads, murmuring softly. The linguist, Professor Wells, recorded fragments of her voice and later noted that the rhythm matched no known human language, but bore similarities to mathematical sequences. The priest attempted a blessing, yet his crucifix blackened at the edges as if scorched by unseen heat. He dropped it instantly, his hand blistered. That was the last prayer ever spoken in that ward. Over the next week, the investigators observed impossible phenomena. Temperature changes occurred in precise patterns, alternating every 43 seconds. Ink bled upward against gravity. Adelaide's pulse synchronized with the asylum's wall clock, and when the clock stopped, so did her breathing, until it resumed ticking again. The linguist, pale and shaking, begged to be released from duty, claiming that Adelaide's murmurs had begun echoing inside his skull long after he left the room. But the priest stayed, now silent, writing in his journal, "She is not possessed. She is remembering." That line remains one of the few legible sentences recovered from his notebook after he vanished from his quarters 2 nights later, leaving behind only his shoes by the door and a half-burned candle still upright. By the end of March 1874, Whitby Asylum was no longer a place of healing but a living organism of fear. The walls seemed to breathe. Doors refused to open unless Adelaide was awake. Records from the surviving attendants describe nights when every clock struck midnight simultaneously, followed by silence so thick it felt like drowning. Patients began speaking her strange tongue in unison, their eyes rolling back as if caught in trance. The ward matron, Mrs. Vale, wrote that she saw faces pressed against the windows, faces she swore were identical to Adelaide's. The hum that once vibrated faintly through the corridors now pulsed like a heartbeat, shaking glass and loosening mortar. Candles burned blue, casting double shadows. One guard fled, screaming that he had seen the sky inside her eyes. Desperate to contain the situation, the asylum's superintendent ordered Adelaide isolated in the underground ward, an abandoned section of the hospital used decades earlier for plague patients. Yet even sealed behind iron doors, her influence spread. Water in the courtyard well turned black overnight. Medical records warped, ink melting into illegible spirals. The remaining staff began to collapse one by one, not from illness, but from exhaustion and dread. Adelaide herself appeared almost peaceful, sitting motionless in her cell, tracing her spirals in dust, whispering. They're coming to take me home." When thunder rolled across the sea that night, it did not sound like weather. It sounded like voices answering her. And by morning, 1/3 of the asylum's population was gone. No bodies were ever found. The following morning, the asylum was a hollow shell echoing with absence. Beds were unmade, doors hung open, and food trays sat untouched. Not a single trace of the missing patients or staff could be found. Not a footprint, not a drop of blood. Dr. Harland, now confined as a patient himself, was discovered sitting cross-legged in his room, muttering Adelaide's name over and over. When questioned by officials from London, he only said, "They followed the sound." Government investigators sealed off the asylum within days, labeling it a case of mass hysteria and desertion. Files were confiscated, diaries burned, and surviving witnesses sworn to secrecy. Even the parish church omitted the event from its records. Stonemere's residents learned to stop asking questions. But silence could not erase what lingered. Fishermen along the cliffs reported hearing a low hum rising from the direction of the asylum ruins at night. Seabirds avoided the cliffs entirely, circling wide as though repelled by an unseen force. And sometimes, when the fog rolled thick and low, villagers claimed to see a pale figure standing by the iron gates, head tilted upward, eyes reflecting starlight where no stars should be. Decades later, during coastal renovations, workers unearthed fragments of human bone fused into the foundations, burned white, smooth as glass. The official report dismissed them as remnants of old plague burials. Yet the lead investigator wrote privately, "The patterns on the bones resemble the same spirals found carved into the asylum walls." Nearly 70 years later, in 1943, during the Second World War, the ruins of Whitby Asylum were repurposed as a temporary shelter for evacuees. Among the rubble and collapsed halls, a military clerk named Arthur Greaves discovered a sealed iron cabinet buried beneath a stairwell. Inside were dozens of scorched documents, all bearing the name Adelaide Thompson. Most were illegible, but a few lines survived, written in Dr. Harland's unsteady hand. "She has gone where sound is born." Greaves, believing he had found evidence of unethical experiments, sent the documents to the Ministry of Health. Within a week, 2 men from London arrived, confiscated the cabinet, and instructed him never to speak of it again. But Arthur had already kept one item, a small glass vial containing something like black sand that shimmered faintly in the dark. Curiosity gnawed at him. That night, he poured the substance onto his desk under a lamp. The grains began to move, forming circular patterns before his eyes, as if remembering their shape. Greaves later told a colleague he heard a whisper that wasn't sound, more like thought. The following morning, his desk was empty, and the vial shattered. He disappeared from his quarters without a trace. Military records list him as absent without leave. Yet, witnesses claimed that for several nights after, they saw a faint light flickering from the ruined asylum, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Whatever Adelaide Thompson had been, her presence was not confined to her century. She had become a story that refused to die, echoing through generations like a signal no one knew how to decode. In 1998, more than a century after Adelaide's first disappearance, the Stonemere ruins drew the attention of a documentary team researching lost Victorian institutions. Led by historian Dr. Evelyn Caro, the group entered the site with digital recorders, thermal cameras, and government clearance. From the beginning, their equipment malfunctioned, batteries drained, lenses fogged, and static filled every recording. Yet among the debris of the western wing, they found something intact, a wooden box, sealed with wax and wrapped in what appeared to be aged bandages. Inside, beneath brittle sheets of paper, was an audio cylinder, a rare artifact from the 19th century. Etched crudely on its lid were the initials A.T. Dr. Caro. Believing it to be a personal message, had it carefully restored at the University of York. The results, however, defied explanation. When the recording was first played, the team expected nothing but distortion. Instead, a child's voice emerged, clear, fragile, and trembling with strange rhythm. It said, "I remember the sound that isn't sound. I remember the sky beneath my feet. Then, a low hum filled the room, identical to the frequency described in 1856 asylum reports. Moments later, every bulb in the laboratory shattered simultaneously. Audio experts later confirmed the cylinder's tones exceeded the human hearing range, capable of inducing hallucinations or panic. But Dr. Caro disagreed. She believed Adelaide's voice was communicating something beyond comprehension. On the recording's final seconds, the child whispered a single, chilling phrase. "It's not another world. It's ours, just deeper." That was the last time the cylinder was ever played. The university sealed it under lock and key. Weeks after the recording was sealed, Dr. Evelyn Caro began to change. Colleagues noticed her growing pale, restless, and distracted during lectures. She claimed she could still hear the hum, faint but constant, like the world itself was vibrating beneath her feet. Her journal, recovered years later, described waking at 3:12 a.m. every night to the sound of soft knocking, always in patterns of 3. At first, she blamed stress. But when she began sketching strange spiral symbols identical to those carved into the asylum walls in 1852, her assistants grew alarmed. One entry read, "I think Adelaide wasn't insane. She was attuned to something just outside the skin of this world. And now, it's listening to me." One evening, while reviewing footage from the excavation, Dr. Caro noticed something impossible. In the corner of one frame, captured in a flash of lightning through a broken window, stood a small girl in a white dress. Hair matted, eyes reflective like glass. The image lasted less than half a second, but Caro froze it, enhanced it, and found the same birthmark described in Adelaide's file, a crescent-shaped scar below the left ear. That night, she called her assistant in tears, whispering, "She's still here." She never left. 2 days later, Evelyn Caro vanished from her home. Her car was found near the cliffs, doors open, engine running. Inside her notebook, investigators found a final entry scrawled in shaky handwriting. "It isn't haunting me. It's showing me the way back." In 2011, nearly 2 decades after Dr. Caro's disappearance, a team of independent paranormal researchers, known as the Northern Phenomena Collective, returned to the ruins of Stonemere to investigate the Adelaide Thompson case. Unlike past historians, their approach blended modern forensics with low-frequency resonance mapping. On their third night, their instruments detected a subsonic vibration originating beneath the asylum's collapsed east wing, perfectly matching the frequency from Adelaide's recording. They began excavation and unearthed a sealed cellar, untouched since the 1800s. Inside were rusted metal restraints, shattered medical jars, and the faint remains of chalk markings on the floor, spiral patterns drawn around a small wooden chair. One team member reported feeling as though someone was standing inches behind him, breathing softly. The air inside the chamber, he wrote, felt aware. At the center of the chamber was an iron box, fused shut with corrosion. When forced open, it revealed a single preserved photograph. Despite the age, the image was astonishingly clear. A young girl, seated calmly, eyes unfocused as if staring through the photographer rather than at him. On the back, written in faded ink, "The Return of Adelaide, June 7, 1855. Experts who later examined the photograph claimed it exhibited no known signs of Victorian development techniques. It was as if the light itself had burned the image directly into the paper. When scanned under infrared, faint figures appeared behind Adelaide, dozens of them, human-shaped, emerging from darkness. The team abandoned the site immediately. One member later confessed, "It wasn't that we saw something move, it was that we all felt it looking back." 3 months after the Stonemere investigation was shut down, one of the researchers, Daniel Mercer, broke his silence. He appeared on a late-night radio show, trembling, voice unsteady. He claimed the cellar discovery was only part of what they found. Beneath the chamber's stone floor, they uncovered a narrow shaft lined with mirror-like mineral deposits, unnatural for the area. It was like standing over a mouth, Mercer said, a mouth that hummed. When he leaned closer, his equipment began to pick up faint whispers, repeating his own name. He dropped the recorder and fled. But later, when reviewing the audio, he heard not just his voice, but another, layered beneath it, echoing words Adelaide once wrote in her journal. "The world below ours is awake." Mercer's account was dismissed as delusion until he vanished days later. His apartment was found empty, except for a single cassette tape labeled Playback 1. Investigators who listened reported a rhythmic vibration that caused nausea and vertigo. Within 10 seconds, one officer collapsed. The tape was sealed as evidence, then quietly misplaced. But an anonymous upload appeared online months later, titled The Adelaide Frequency. Audio analysts confirmed the tone was not synthetic. It fell between natural sound ranges and seismic resonance. Its exact origin remains unknown. Those who listened for more than 2 minutes reported strange side effects, electrical surges, headaches, and vivid dreams of a pale girl standing at the edge of a black sea, whispering, "You're not supposed to be here yet." In 2017, sound engineer and researcher Dr. Helen Varro at Cambridge University obtained a leaked copy of the Adelaide Frequency. Determined to debunk the myth, she ran it through advanced spectral analysis. The results left her speechless. Embedded within the sound waves, beneath layers of distortion, was a pattern of human speech, structured, rhythmic, almost musical. When isolated and slowed, it formed a sequence of phrases in archaic English. "The veil thins / the breath returns / I am still here." Dr. Varro, convinced this was a coded message from Adelaide herself, repeated the test under controlled lab conditions. Each time, the waveform shifted, subtly changing as if responding to her presence. When she adjusted the playback to match the original 1850s asylum frequency, the lab's lights dimmed and temperature sensors dropped by 8 degrees. Something within the sound was alive, or at least reactive. After 48 hours of testing, Varro's team discovered an even stranger anomaly. When visualized in 3D mapping, the waveform created an image, the outline of a girl's face. Her expression was neutral, almost serene, but the eyes appeared hollow, depthless. Varro's final field notes read, "It is not residual sound. It is intelligence, something left behind or reaching through." The following morning, her lab was found deserted. Security footage showed the computer monitors flickering before going dark. No sign of forced entry, no evidence of departure. Yet, the final recording on her terminal captured a whisper faintly behind the static. "Helen, do you understand now? I am what you'll become." That file was immediately confiscated by the Ministry of Defense, and Dr. Varro was declared missing. In 2020, a cache of classified documents surfaced anonymously on an encrypted forum known for hosting historical leaks. The files, marked property of the British Home Office, Division of Anomalous Studies, contained correspondence dating back to 1860. They referenced an operation named Project Adelaide. The objective, to investigate a child of unknown biological resonance discovered near Stonemere. According to the documents, Adelaide Thompson's blood carried microscopic crystalline structures never before recorded, which refracted electromagnetic signals. One report read, "Her cells respond to subsonic frequencies. She appears to exist in partial phase with local reality." It seemed Adelaide wasn't simply delusional. She might have been something no one understood, a bridge between worlds, or a symptom of one colliding with ours. The files also included a chilling memorandum from a scientist known only as Dr. C. Mallory, written in 1861. "We tried to enter resonance. We failed. The sound persists in the walls." Later memos confirmed the government ordered the asylum sealed and records destroyed, fearing mass hysteria if knowledge of her persistence were made public. But the leak also included modern photos, satellite thermal scans of the Stonemere region, showing faint circular heat signatures in the shape of the same spiral symbol carved by Adelaide nearly 2 centuries earlier. It was as if her frequency still pulsed beneath the earth. One annotation, dated 2018, stated simply, "Activity increasing. She's calling again." And with that, the world was forced to ask a question no historian could answer. What if Adelaide Thompson never died at all? By late 2022, reports began surfacing across northern England, sightings of a pale young girl wandering rural roads near former asylum sites. Drivers described her as wearing an old-fashioned white dress, her bare feet leaving no prints, her eyes glimmering like wet glass. Locals started calling her the Echo Girl. Most dismissed it as folklore reborn through the internet, but police records told a darker story. In 3 separate incidents, motorists who claimed to have seen her vanished within 24 hours. Their vehicles were found idling on empty roads, headlights still on, doors open. Dashcam footage from one of those cars showed the figure standing ahead in the fog. When the driver called out, a vibration distorted the microphone, and a child's voice whispered, "Can you hear it too?" The clip ended with a single word, barely audible: Adelaide. Paranormal investigators and amateur historians descended on Derbyshire, hoping to document proof of her existence. Many returned shaken. One team from a Manchester university reported that their compasses spun uncontrollably near the old asylum ruins. Recordings captured an eerie tone identical to the 1850s asylum frequency, rising, falling, then pausing like breathing. Nearby wildlife refused to cross the perimeter. Even more unsettling were accounts from those who entered the ruins at night. Several claimed to have seen writing appear on the damp walls, words forming in condensation, still listening. Those who stayed long enough described the overwhelming feeling of being pulled downward, as if the air itself had weight, a slow gravity urging them toward the sound Adelaide once called the deeper world. In March 2024, investigative journalist Naomi Firth set out to document the phenomenon for a BBC podcast on unsolved English hauntings. Determined to separate myth from evidence, she retraced every location linked to Adelaide Thompson, Stonemere, Ashbourne, and the cliffs where Dr. Caro Carr was found decades earlier. Her recordings began as routine interviews, but by the 3rd day, the tone shifted. In one entry, her voice trembles. "It's never silent here. Even when I stop breathing, something hums below everything. It's not the wind. It's inside the stone." Naomi spent her final night near the asylum ruins, setting up audio sensors and night vision. At 3:12 a.m., all her equipment activated at once. The frequency meter spiked violently, registering a vibration lower than any natural resonance ever recorded by human instruments. Her final log, later recovered from a cloud backup, plays for exactly 1 minute and 52 seconds. It begins with faint static, then her voice, whispering, "There's someone here with me. I can see her. She's smaller than I expected. She's smiling." A second voice, childlike, layered with distortion, replies softly, "I told you I'm not gone." After that, the hum swells to a deafening pitch. Naomi gasps, and the recording ends with a final phrase, half human, half machine, saying, "Another one has heard." Authorities found Naomi's tent intact, her notebook open beside a single footprint in the mud, bare, small, and facing inland, not toward the sea. Her remains were never located. Yet one of her microphones continued recording for hours after, the low hum still pulsing steadily in the night. Today, the name Adelaide Thompson has all but vanished from official records, yet her story refuses to die. Historians label it hysteria. Scientists call it misinterpretation. But the pattern persists: whispers and frequencies, missing persons near the ruins, and sightings of a barefoot girl standing in fog long after midnight. The Adelaide frequency still circulates online, a corrupted audio clip passed between forums like a curse. Some claim that listening unlocks brief visions of another landscape, a mirror of our world but colder, quieter, and void of light. In that silence, they say, a girl hums softly, waiting for someone to respond. Experts who've analyzed the clip describe a near-imperceptible voice hidden within the static, a voice repeating in rhythm with human breath. "I am still here." Perhaps Adelaide Thompson wasn't a ghost, nor an alien being, but something simpler, a warning. A child who glimpsed the thin line between our world and something beneath it, something vast, sentient, and patient. From 1852 to now, her story has been erased, buried, and forgotten. Yet the hum continues, woven into the cracks of modern life, beneath city streets, through power lines, inside the static of your own devices. If you listen closely tonight, when everything else is silent, you might hear it too. And if you do, don't follow the sound. Because, as Adelaide once whispered to Dr. Harland, it's not another world. It's ours. Just deeper,